I got some hate mail about the subject line of today. Uh, Need marketing and sales acceleration. It's your positioning, stupid. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's from the 1992 presidential campaign, and I took some creative license. James Carville, who was a strategist for Bill Clinton, there was a term called "It's the economy, stupid." Okay, which became a very, very important part and really led to Clinton's victory back in 1992. We're not taking a political stance here, guys, so we try to be apolitical with Sammy. But what was important and what Carville was communicating was effectively, address what's hiding in plain sight. People were talking about this aspect of presidential elections and more. And it's not so different from the marketing world. We're going to be all excited about the new ABM tool, what we're doing with first party data, and all these other elements in the ever bloating tech stack on sales and marketing that we have. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the positioning right, everything you're doing doesn't matter. So with today's session, Carville's an interesting guy, but what I like about April, and I've read her book as well. Let me see if I've got a couple of her books up. What I liked about what she was doing, it was really a no BS approach. Thank you, Pam. A no BS approach to positioning. And this is a really big deal. And sometimes we have to get back to everything else. And by the way, in April, we'll talk about this. If your positioning isn't right, then ultimately, when you get to your sales pitch, which is her next book, which is I've got right here, then your sales pitch is going to be equally wrong as well. So what I like about April, unlike James Carville, April's from Toronto, so she's going to be much nicer about this approach, but don't underestimate her punch. Okay. So as she goes through this stuff, and I'll give her a bio in just a second here, but April, when I first met April, she covered positioning like I had never heard before. All the key elements, and like a lot of people on the call have done positioning for 20 years. It really opened my eyes, and it's time for all of us to revisit this. And I'm assuming everybody on the call has a stake in positioning. So let me give you some background on April, if I may. She's an experienced startup executive with a profound interest in how companies introduce new offerings. And this is a really big deal because new offerings are oftentimes, in my experience, in my research, mispositioned. Okay, and she successfully connected with customers who are willing to invest in them. With the wealth of experience in market positioning, April has spearheaded the launch of 16 products into various markets, and her experience spans from creating new markets to expanding existing ones and strategically positioning new products within established markets. Throughout her career, April's held executive positions in numerous successful startups. I'll attribute that to positioning, including roles as CEO, COO, and VP of marketing. And she has also contributed expertise to global corporations like IBM, where she played a pivotal role in launching and nurturing a new product division. For those of us who have worked at IBM ever in our career, that is a monumental task. And if you're still standing after positioning in IBM, you've got to be good. She's also written 2 great books. Pam, could you hold up? Do you have the book with you there? So her first book is obviously awesome, How to Stand Out in Noisy, Crowded Markets, a great guide. I've actually read it twice. And additionally, she's recently released Sales Pitch, How to Build a Story to Stand Out and Win. And as I mentioned, I've got that here as well. 2 fantastic reads. In April, love your writing style. I love your incorporation of quotes into the book. So the format for today, as I hand it over to April, is we're going to go through elements of both the positioning aspect, but also I've asked April to tie in some of the sales pitch piece because we have a mixed audience here of sales and marketing professionals. So I think it's going to go rather well. So April's going to go through a presentation and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So April, greetings from Boston to Toronto. Welcome aboard and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to be here. I'm going to share some slides. So let's just pull those up. Can you see my screen all right there now?
Perfectly.
I heard sorry, and that's all I heard. So does that mean yes?
Looks great. Looks great.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, as Rob mentioned, I got a lot of ground to cover on this one. We'll see how far we get. I'm going to talk about positioning and then I'm going to talk about how positioning maps to a sales pitch. We don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to try to do this fast and then leave as much time as I can for questions because I think the interesting stuff happens in the questions. positioning, it's so, this is primarily what I do right now. I work with tech companies and we work on positioning and how to take that positioning map into a sales pitch. And I'm dealing with a lot of CEOs, and CEOs are funny because you'll say, hey, I'm the positioning consultant. And they'll be like, I know what positioning is. It's messaging. And I'll be like, yeah, not really. Like it's more than that. Or they'll say, a lot of them think it's a tagline. People get really excited about taglines. I don't know why that is, but they'll say, yeah, we're making a tagline. I'm like, nah, a little bit more than just a tagline. My personal pet peeve is when people talk about brand positioning, because I feel like there's positioning and there's branding, but those two things are actually quite different. In fact, most of the things that we confuse positioning with are things that happen downstream from positioning, but we actually need to do positioning first. I kind of think about it this way. If everything we do in marketing and sales is the house, positioning is the foundation upon which the house is built. I have this really clunky definition of positioning. It defines how our product is the best in the world at delivering something, some value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Now, um, that's kind of a mouthful. One way to think about it maybe is context setting for products. And context is important, particularly for new things, because that's how we kind of make sense of stuff, particularly things that we have never really encountered before. I'm going to give you some stupid examples and then give you a less stupid example. So like this, for example, so this is a product that I encountered completely out of context surfing around on Amazon. And when I saw it, I was like, look at that thing. And you know what I thought that was? I thought that was a shoe. Yeah, that was like Crocs. They're really into super ugly shoes. And they made this thing where your toes would stick out and you'd have this thing at the back and whatever. I even sent it to my friend. I'm like, hey, look at these ugly Crocs. And then I saw it in context and I was like, oh man, that's not what it is at all. It's actually a dog muzzle for making your dog look stupid. And then even a hint of context can actually change the way you think about a product. Like if I show you that, and then I show you this, you'd be like, oh, I'm on to her now. She's into dog stuff. That's probably one of those cones, you put on your dog after the dog comes back from the vet. And actually it's for people and it's for cake to eat noodles. And so the noodle drips don't get it. I don't know what it's for, to be honest, but the marketers give you the clue. See that guy in the background? That's the clue. This is, what this thing's actually for is making people fall in love with you. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Sometimes we lie in marketing. But so positioning works the same way in tech products. We just have a different set of tools at our disposal. So we set context in different ways. We don't necessarily get to, show all the pictures or noodles or dogs or whatever, but we set context by the value we choose to focus on. We can set it by the customers we choose to highlight. The images and the branding we choose will help reinforce that positioning. The pricing will help reinforce that positioning. One of the key ways we can establish positioning is the market category that we choose to position ourselves in. So for example, if I came to you and I said, hey, I got this revolutionary next generation, it's so hot, CRM, you would make a bunch of assumptions about that product, even though I haven't told you anything except the market category. So if I told you that, and then I said, well, who's my competition? You'd say, well, that's Salesforce. I mean, they're the leader in that market. And then I'd say, okay, well, would you assume that there are a certain bunch of features in that CRM? Of course, you would assume it tracks deals across a pipeline, like CRM stuff. You would assume, like, who's the person that I sell the CRM to? Oh, that's somebody in sales, probably the head of sales. That's who buys the CRM. Even you would make an assumption about pricing. Now, how would you know anything? I didn't tell you anything about this product. All I told you was a CRM. But if you assume I'm competing with Salesforce because Salesforce is the leader in that market, you assume I'm not charging more than Salesforce, am I? So here's how this works. If I do a good job and I position my product in a way that sets off a set of assumptions about my product that are true, fantastic. I just save marketing and sales a lot of work. Like, I don't have to say who my competition is. It's assumed. I don't have to list every single feature. Half that stuff is table stakes. Unfortunately, it works the same if we mess it up. So if we do a bad job of this, I position my product in such a way that it sets off a set of assumptions about my stuff, and those assumptions are not true. Well, now marketing and sales has their work cut out for them. Undoing the damage positioning is already done and saying, no, we're not that. We're not that. We're over here. Let me give you an example. So this is a company, I worked with these guys a long time ago here in Canada. They recently got acquired, but they're called ClearPath Robotics. And I love this story because the CEO tells this story that, they got advanced degrees in mechatronics engineering. They come out of school, they're making a startup and they're making robots. And so things are going great. And they make this robot on the right-hand side. And what it is it drives around a manufacturing plant and it delivers things from one
Okay,
place
so
to
where are
another.
your headphones?
I don't think I have any.
So
But
that's Peter. You might want to mute. So it delivers things from one place to another. Now, you might not think that sounds like it's difficult. It turns out this thing is a miracle of modern technology. It's full of mapping, sensors, and artificial intelligence. Anyways, they get a meeting with the person who buys robots at the manufacturing plant, and they come in and they say, "Hi, we're ClearPath Robotics. We're here to sell you a fancy new robot." And the CEO tells this story where he says, "The minute we say that word, the person is like, oh, robots. Like, you know what, buddy? We've been buying robots for decades, and you know what we got? Approved robot vendors, and you're not one of them. And your robot, like, why is your robot so expensive? We're not used to paying that much for robots, And then the CEO's tap dancing, going, "No, no, no, we're not like that. No, we're not that kind of robot. We're special robots, special robots, like the world has never seen before robots." Eventually, they get this idea. Maybe this positioning as a robot isn't doing them any favors. They go back to the office and they're like, "All right, what's special about us? It's mobility. Thing drives around. It's mapping, sensors, artificial intelligence, make sure that the thing can do the job that it's designed to do." What drives around and is full of mapping, sensors, and artificial intelligence? And eventually they get this idea. Maybe this thing is a robot. Maybe what it is a self-driving car, or the way they ended up positioning it as autonomous vehicles for industrial uses. That's a completely different starting point for the customer. Now the customer is like, well, of course it drives around. We know this about self. Of course it's full of mapping, sensors, artificial intelligence. That's what we know about this stuff. What I really like about this example is a few things. One, they went all the way on the positioning. So they renamed the robot itself Auto to make it sound like a car. And then if you look at the industrial design of it, it's got white headlights on the front and red tail lights on the back. And those do absolutely nothing. It's a robot, man. It doesn't need any lights. But those are there just to drive home this idea that this thing is like a little car. If positioning is so important, why are we so bad at it? Like many of you, I think, that came through marketing, you probably read this book. It's called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind by these guys, Rees and Trout. This is an amazing book, and it's generally sitting on my desk. I've read it like 100 times. I think everyone should read this book. The frustrating part about this book, though, is it defines what positioning is. It defines why it's super important. It gives you a bunch of examples, and then it doesn't tell you how to do it. This I found very frustrating as an in-house vice president of marketing. So I had positioned a handful of things. I went back to marketing school. I took all the courses. I read all the books, and there was nothing in there that told me how to actually get positioning done. The closest thing I got was like the positioning statement, which is this like Mad Libs fill in the blanks thing. But the positioning statement exercise didn't tell me how to fill in the blanks. Like one of those blanks is market category. If I'm ClearPath Robotics, how do I know what the best market category is? Am I a robot or a self-driving car? Who knows? There's nothing in that exercise that teaches me that. So at one point I decided, well, I'm gonna logic this out. And so here's where I got to. I actually have a degree in engineering, so I thought I'm going to do this like the engineers do it. I'm going to break positioning down into little component pieces, solve for the component pieces, smash them together, voila, good positioning. Breaking it into pieces isn't that hard because we kind of agree on what the pieces are. They're the blanks in the positioning statement, more or less. I think there's 5. The first one is competitive alternatives. If you didn't exist, what would a customer do? Second is unique attributes or features. If we're talking about products, these are features of your product or capabilities of your company that the other guys don't have. The third one is value. Customers don't actually really care about your features. They care about the value that those features can deliver for their business. So this is super important. And then in B2B, we're not trying to sell to everybody. We're trying to sell to certain kinds of customers that are really good fit for us. So who are those target customer segments? And then the last one's market category. Am I a car, or self-driving car, or a robot? So those are the 5 things. Now, what's funny is when you break it apart this way, the first thing you realize is that the things are not independent. They actually have a relationship to each other. So let's take, for example, value. If I'm talking about differentiated value, the value that my product can deliver that no other product in the market can is completely dependent on what? Was dependent on unique features or capabilities, right? Like I don't get to just make this stuff up. It comes from things that the product can do that no one else can. But then if you think about it, unique attributes or capabilities are only unique when you compare them to a competitor. So those three things are all related. And then if you think about it, what's my definition of a best fit customer? That's a customer that really cares a lot about the value that only I can deliver. So those two things are related. And then market category is a little bit trickier. But if we think about it as context setting, it's the context that I position the product in such that this value makes sense to these people. So I can't figure that out without figuring out customer segments and value. For a few years, I decided this is why we don't have a methodology because there's no good starting point here. The best you could do is work your way around the components, come up with candidate positioning, test it in the market. If it works, great, you run with it. If it doesn't, you throw it out and you try again. And that sucks because if you don't get it right the first time and then you got to go to your boss and tell them you're going to go do it again after you've been messing with it for 2 months, like that's a good way to get fired. And so that sucked. But eventually where I landed at was, it's a long story, but what happened was I got really into Clayton Christensen. If you've ever read the Competing Against Luck and the Jobs to Be Done stuff, I got super into that. And where I landed after this was here. We actually have to start with competitive alternatives. If we don't start here, then what happens is we get positioning that sounds good in the office, doesn't work outside because it's insufficiently differentiated from our competitors. So we start with this stick in the ground. You know, if we didn't exist, what would a customer do? This is what we have to position against. Then we can say, well, what do we got that they don't have? Feature function capabilities of the company. We can fill up a whiteboard full of those things. Then we can actually go down those capabilities, and for every capability say, okay, we got a whiz bang AI thing. So what? Why does a customer care? What's the value of this thing for a customer's business? And I can translate this stuff to value.
So look at that.
And then once I have my differentiated value themes, then I can ask myself, okay, like we're the only company on the planet that can deliver customers a combination of this value plus this value plus this value. Then I can ask myself, well, what are the characteristics of a target account that make them really, really care a lot about the value that only I can deliver? And then once I've got value and target customers, I can say, look, what's the best context to position this thing in? Am I a robot or a self-driving car? So that's how we do it. Now, there's lots of ways to screw this up, like everything in life. Often companies will mess it up at the very first step, that they don't actually have a deep understanding of who their true competitors are. And it usually comes from differences in the team. So when I do this stuff, we have a cross-functional team together specifically to solve that problem. So for example, lots of times company will come to me and they'll say, oh, we got this thing, April, it's so cool. And I'll say, ooh, like, who do you compete with? And they'll give me this list of little tiny competitors nobody on the planet has ever heard of. And I'll say, that's interesting. Well, how do you beat those guys? And they'll say, ease of use. They're the old crap. And when you do stuff their way, it takes 29 clicks. But if you do it with us, it's 2 clicks. So we're way easier to use. And I say, okay, that's awesome. And I say, so do you lose a lot of deals to those other guys? And they'll say, no, we never lose a deal to those guys. And I'm like, well, why do you think they're competitors then if you never lose a deal to them? I said, well, do you win every deal that comes up? No, obviously not. No. And I said, well, what do you lose to? And they'll say, well, we lose to do nothing. And I'm like, so what's the customer doing if they're doing nothing? They'll say, oh, they just hire an intern to do it. And I'm like, oh, so your positioning is ease of use. And you think you're going to beat the intern at ease of use. And I'll be like, no, you know what's really easy to use? The intern is really easy to use. You're like, Joey, fill out the spreadsheet, man. Come back with a coffee. We'll figure it out. But if you recognize that Joey was the competition, then you're like, Joey sucks at a lot of stuff. Like Joey makes mistakes. Joey quits on you. Joey doesn't understand the history of the customer, blah, blah, blah. So the first thing we have to do is understand that. in the interest of time, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch from this and I'm going to touch on this sales pitch idea, and then we're going to go to questions. So I'm going to skip this story. So here's what's funny. So I'm doing this work with clients, and we're getting everybody on the team in agreement and alignment on here's who we compete with, here's how we're different, this is the value we can deliver, no one else can. Here's the customers that care a lot about this. Here's the market we're going to win. And then what I discover is if we just stop there, marketing's all happy. They go off and they write the messaging and all this stuff. And sales is like, this is great. Yeah, I agree with all of this. And then they go back to actually do first call pitches, and they're like doing the same pitch they always did, which interestingly, in SaaS businesses, and most of the companies I work with are SaaS businesses, that pitch isn't even really a pitch. It's more like a product walkthrough demo. Like, here's a feature, here's a feature, here's a feature, here's a feature. And so there's not a lot of positioning going on there at all. And so the marketing team finds this very frustrating. CEO finds this a little bit frustrating. Like, we just came up with this new positioning. How come we just show all the features when we get to the sales pitch? So that got me thinking about sales pitches. I could give you a very long story about where this came from. And if anybody's interested in the questions, I could give you the short version of it. I'm going to skip right to the punchline since we have like 3 minutes. But I'm going to show you a couple of examples of companies that I've worked with and how the pitch looked before and how the pitch looked after. So one of the key things I think that the research tells us about sales pitches is that highly effective salespeople do a good job of both understanding what the customer's needs are, but also really understanding the company's point of view in the market and doing a little bit of education on that. And so, because mostly what we're doing in these pitches is a product walkthrough, here's my version of how we might fix that. There's 2 pieces to this sales pitch structure. There's a setup and a follow through. The setup is not so much about you. It's more about the market. It's a good place for us to do discovery with the customer, but it's also a good place for us to teach them about our point of view and why we built the thing we built. It has 3 pieces. One is kind of our insight into the market. So this is kind of, this is why we built our stuff in a different way, because we saw the problem in a slightly different way than other companies do. So we start with this insight. Then we have a discussion with the customer about, well, look, like, we're in this space there's lots of other alternatives. What are you guys doing? What have you used before? Here's what we see. And here's what we think are the pros and cons of the other approaches to the problem. And then we wind up with sort of getting the customer aligned with, hey, like, we think that a perfect solution needs to tick these boxes. Would you agree based on our discussion? If the customer says yes, then you spend the rest of the pitch proving that you can deliver the value that we agreed was really important. It makes more sense with an example, so I'm going to give you that. So here's a company I did some work with a while back, and I like them as an example because everybody gets the space. So they're in the customer service space. So think like Zendesk, that kind of stuff. And specifically, these guys came into that space. They had started working in the early days with e-commerce businesses. So they built this product very different because they decided the needs of e-commerce businesses were different when it came to customer service. And in particular, in e-commerce businesses, you don't have a store and you don't have salespeople. So customer service is one of the only times you ever get to actually talk to a customer. So if you can deliver an amazing customer experience in that moment, it's really good for revenue. Like it increases basket size, it drives repeat purchases and all this stuff. So they built this system specifically to do that. Their competitors were getting to the positioning here. So what's their competition? Well, lots of these e-commerce businesses, they just start out with a shared inbox. It's just support@whatever.com, and they have a shared inbox. Works fine if you're weenie. But when things start getting a little busy, you want some support bells and whistles. You want to be able to do assignments, prioritization, all this kind of stuff. So then those companies tend to go to help desk software. So like Zendesk or whatever. Problem with help desk software is, 1, it's way harder to use. So there are people got to get trained on it. And 2, it's been designed, like all these help desk systems have been designed to reduce the cost of support. So they don't care so much about experience. They're more about driving the cost down. So they're going to be trying to drive you to low cost channels. They're trying to get you off the phone as fast as possible. So this is really kind of a different philosophy. Now, let me do before and after pitches. So here's the pitch that they were doing before and what I see typically in first call pitches. They're like, hey, e-commerce business, what are you guys doing? What are your requirements? A little discovery up front. What are your requirements? Blah, blah, blah. We ask them some questions. And then we jump into this walkthrough demo and we'll say, okay, look, here's how you log in. Look, we have this thing. It looks just like a shared inbox. This is how it works across channels. But we got other stuff. We can do assignments, prioritization. Look at it, it's so good. We got workflow integration, blah, 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 blah. And we keep on going until we run out of things to talk about. And that's the end of the pitch. Now, I'm a customer coming in that's using a shared inbox or using help desk software, looking at help desk software. How's this different? Kind of looks like my shared inbox. Not all that different. It has some things, but, Zendesk probably does those things too. Why pick you over the other guys? Not clear. Here's how we do the pitch my way. So we start with this insight. So we walk in, hey, e-commerce business. We work with e-commerce businesses. In fact, we work with thousands of them. And here's what we see. E-commerce businesses do stuff different. They actually see customer service as a growth driver instead of a cost center. And we think that's really different. Would you guys agree with that? Oh, yeah, we would. Remember, we have a little thing, right? So now we've worked with thousands of e-commerce businesses just like you. And so we see there's different ways of handling this. A lot of the folks start with a shared inbox. Did you start with a shared inbox? Oh, yeah, we did. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm doing discovery. And what we see there is it works fine as long as you're not growing too fast. When you start growing too fast, the problem is you want all these other bells and whistles. Yeah, does that resonate with you? Yeah, it does, whatever. Then we say, well, then they go to traditional help desk software, Zendesk or whatever. And those are great. Like they do all the things, all the features, all the bells and whistles. Two problems with them. One, hard to get your folks to adopt it because a little bit harder to use. Then the second thing is there's this real focus on cost reduction. Like your customer is no longer a customer. They're ticket number 145. And so we looked at this and we said, look, in a perfect world, what we'd have for e-commerce businesses is something that's as easy to use as an inbox, but gives me all the bells and whistles of a full-featured help desk so that I never outgrow it and delivers an amazing customer experience because I know for e-commerce business that's important. We want that, right? Now, at this point, the customer is either right or they're not right. If they're right, then I got you. I got you. This deal is mine to lose at this point. All I got to do is show that I do this stuff because we have agreed on purchase criteria. The customer says, nah, I'm actually just worried about costs. I disqualify that deal. That's a Zendesk deal. They're going to do that better. But if the customer leans across and says, yeah, man, we want that. And we say, great. Now we go to the demo. And the demo is not showing them everything. The demo is showing them how I meet those 3 points of value. Easy to use and adopt. Look, the thing just looks like a shared inbox, easy to use. You set it up in minutes. Your people are going to love it. 2, all the advanced features you need. Never going to have to go out of this. Here's how you do assignments, prioritization, all this stuff. Last one, look at the amazing experience. Customer gets to pick the channel. We don't shove you to the low-cost channel. Customer gets to keep their name. They're not ticket number 145. This, in my opinion, does a much better job answering the question, why us over the other guys? Anyways, I'm going to shut up now. I have 2 books. Orange one teaches you how to do the positioning thing. Yellow one teaches you how to do the sales pitch thing. And there's even a little workbook thingy if you sign up for the newsletter because, hey, I'm in marketing over here. But I'm going to stop it and look you in the eyeballs. And then we're going to take questions.
Okay, April, fantastic as usual. I got some DM questions. So if folks want to ask questions, please drop them into the chat or please raise your hand and we'll call on you. In April, I want to, when we talk about the entire flow here, I'd like to turn around because a lot of people here are in startup companies. And while we were in the green room, we became very animated about the board involvement in the positioning exercise. Yeah. And I made a comment to April that, I deal with a lot of companies where the board is suddenly the positioning department. And so April, what does the board involvement in positioning mean to you?
Yeah. So usually, the board shouldn't be involved in positioning. And so if the board is in there arguing about your positioning, then something has gone terribly wrong. So I think there's one or two things. I think there's one or two things we need to think about there. In my experience, if the board starts getting involved, it's because they think the CEO isn't thinking about it, or they don't understand the CEO's thinking on the position. So what you'll get is, they'll be like, well, you guys are going after the mid-market. Why aren't you going after Fortune 500 companies? I think Fortune 500 companies would be a lot better. You guys are saying your value is this, but I think your value is that, and fight me on it. And so what I found is sometimes the company has just fallen into their positioning and they haven't actually gone through a process to get there. So this idea of who's our best fit customer, it was just wishful thinking. They just kind of picked it because it sounded good, but it's maybe not necessarily the best fit for the product that they've actually built. Or the CEO has positioning. They have made these decisions deliberately, but they're having a hard time defending it. If we actually go through a positioning process, then the CEO is much better able to defend the positioning because they can explain how they got there and say, look, these are the competitors we see in deals. This is what we've got that's different. Our differentiated value is this. And it is what it is. So we can now have a fight about it and say, well, I wish it was something different, but the product kind of is what it is at this moment. We can fight about the vision and where we're going to be 2 years from now, but it is what it is right now.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Excellent. Thank you. And we will avoid the subject. Well, one of my portfolio companies positioned it this way. We're not gonna go there.
Well, so I have actually had more like a dozen or so times where we're doing this positioning exercise with a company, and the company comes and asks me, like, can the board member sit in on the positioning? And my answer to that is always, yeah, it is. Now, I don't expect a board member to say a lot unless they've been talking to a lot of customers. But what generally happens is at the end of that, the board is super on board again, because now they understand where it came from and we're not just making it up.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So Mike Smith chimed in. What should we be mindful of positioning services versus tech sales?
So services is it's interesting. So I've worked with a bunch of companies that are just services. So they don't have a product. They're just, and most of them are tech services. So it's custom software, basically. And the hard thing when we're positioning that is getting really honest about what our differentiated capabilities actually are. Like in a product, it's generally features, right? And the feature exists or it doesn't. That's it. But in a services business, services company will say, well, we can do anything. It's just a simple matter of hiring some people. Like we don't have that capability now, but we could. We just hire some people that can do that. But the reality is you actually don't have that capability because you don't have it any better than anyone else does. So a real differentiated capability in a services business is provable. So you can say, for example, we're specialized on this particular, like I just did some work with a company and they specialize in headless commerce solutions. And so they can say, look, we have 27 guys certified in this headless commerce solution, and nobody else has that. We've done 35 projects that look like this. Nobody else has that. We have a bunch of pre-built code that we use with every single client to make it really efficient to implement the back end stuff so that we spend more time on the front end stuff with you. That means the code is more solid, less likely to break, and 2, we're going to deliver it faster than anybody else. So you have to be honest with yourself about this capability step. And I think that's the important thing with the services business. Otherwise, I think the process is more or less the same, but that differentiated capability step is contentious when we do it.
Terrific. Thank you, April. So I'm going to do Will, and then we'll go to Laura. So Will, do you want to come off mute? And because you had some more details on what you wanted to ask.
Yeah, you bet. So, thanks, April. This was really great. And I am not a marketing professional, so I love even being able to the way you've approached teaching us about this. So, I'm working on a product which is specifically for executive team and board engagement. So, it's not competing with employee engagement. And the question I asked is, how do you think about the sales pitch for a product that its consumers don't necessarily know they need or don't believe they need, but you have evidence that it is of value when used?
Yeah. So the tricky part on that is that you need to, in those situations, you need to wake up the customer to the problem, because they don't even think there's a problem, because they don't think there's a better way to do it than what they're doing now. And so what you have to do is kind of give them the insight that makes them go, oh crap, I never really thought about that. Yeah. So this insight step on your sales pitch is really, really important. So I'll give you an example of this. So I worked with a company that was in the sales enablement space, and this is a terrible space. There's like tons and tons of companies there. Companies know that they need a sales enablement platform, but their whole thing was how you measure the success of that sales enablement. Now, most sales enablement platforms, give you no way to measure that other than the guy took the training and he passed the test and that's it. So these folks were actually looking at the results of sales enablement in a different way. So they would look at it and say, well, did it work? Like, did it improve time to first deal? Did it improve time to make quota? That's what we care about in sales enablement, no? So all of their pitches had to start with that. So they would come in and be like, hey, like, you're the head of sales enablement. How do you prove that your work is impacting the business in a positive way? And they'd say, well, we make everybody take the training, we make them do the thing. And they're like, yeah, well, but why is sales enablement important? It's important because every day your rep's not making quota costs you money. And then they had this neat study that showed, a difference in a week of ramp time and what that meant to the ultimate revenue of the business. And so they did this very good job of educating the client on, look, like that ramp looks like this versus like this. That's a difference of millions of dollars potentially, depending on the size of your sales team. So you'll have to do the same thing. Like, you're going to have to come in and essentially educate the customer on the problem and make them understand the urgency of solving that problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that because that's your job, often startups that have that problem, the thing that their success really depends on is in the very, very early days, they are highly segmenting who they're going after, and they're going after the slice of the market that really has the problem bad. Because those folks are more likely to be slightly problem aware versus the folks that are way over here that, you're going to have to make them probably problem aware, and it's going to be a real journey. But I guarantee you that if you're solving a real problem, there are certain kinds of companies that have that problem way worse than others. And if you can target them, they're going to be much easier to sell because it's not as hard to wake them up to the problem and say, hey, like, you've got this.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks, April. Laura has a question. This is actually an interesting question as well. So once you're done with positioning, how do you advise companies on how to develop and invest in brand? Because positioning is an interesting thing. I think we've all experienced misalignment between brand and positioning.
Yeah.
So would you talk about that?
Yeah. So the first thing is, it really depends on your definition of brand, because I'm telling you, like, every company comes at me with a completely different definition of brand. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, and sometimes when they say brand, what they actually mean is positioning. And so I'm like, ugh. But here's the way I think about it. In the B2B enterprise type companies, which is mainly what I'm dealing with here, we want the brand to be reflective of the positioning. So for example, if I just did some work with a great big cybersecurity company. And their differentiation is all around, being able to detect things in advance and keeping the company safe and all that stuff. That is very, very different from the company that I did 2 weeks before that, which develops software for daycares. So, the daycare people have this branding that's all very colorful and bright, and, it appeals to parents, and it's obviously for kids and all this stuff. The cybersecurity people, their branding is all like, safe, secure, blue. The imagery they're using is very different than the imagery for the folks doing the daycare thing. Their tone of voice is very different. Like, it's much more authoritative. Security sounds like you're talking to the government, whereas the daycare people, totally different tone of voice. So in a perfect world, we have this alignment this way. Sometimes we don't get to do it at the same time. Like, sometimes we've got branding stuff, it already exists. We come and do a shift in positioning, and we don't have money to go do the branding stuff right away. And we can make small tweaks to it and evolve over time. But typically, I've never gone in and done a positioning workshop where we changed the positioning so much that the branding was just garbage at that point and we had to throw it out and start over. Sometimes it's not perfect, but we're gonna mess with it and do it over time. So it's okay if you just did a branding thing and then we come in and do a positioning thing after. But I think in a perfect world, we'd really have our arms around the positioning, and then we would start looking at branding stuff after that. But if it comes the other way around, I think that's fine too.
Thanks, April. We got about 5 more minutes. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. People are asking the role. People are asking about the CEO, but I'll talk about business leader, because in certain organizations, the GM is kind of the quasi CEO.
Yeah.
So what's the role as we go? Your comment about the lack of a positioning process resonates. That's a big deal. I think to your point about the recent Trout book. Yeah, this is what positioning is, but not how to do it. So when we talk about how to do it, what's the who component?
Yeah.
And what's the CEO's role? Who owns it? Who else should be at the table? And possibly, how often should we do this?
Yeah, great questions. In my experience, when I started down this path, like, I thought positioning was a marketing thing that we just did in the marketing department. But what I discovered is if we just did the marketing thing in the marketing department, nobody else agreed with it. And so nobody else would adopt it. So that sucked. And then early on, I thought, well, it's really important to get sales involved, because if we don't have sales involved, then the positioning never makes the jump from marketing to sales. But it's actually the same problem we have with product. If I don't have product involved, then I got a problem there. And then the CEO has opinions about this. Like, imagine if I, as the head of marketing, showed up at ClearPath Robotics and said, hey guys, we're not a robot anymore. We're a self-driving car. Like, do you think the CEO would have some opinions? Of course they would. And so, in my opinion, the CEO needs to own, like, the CEO needs to be heavily involved. They need to be fully bought into the process. And the positioning should be developed with a cross-functional team. I don't work with any clients where they say, oh, the CEO doesn't want to be involved. That's crazy town. I'm like, no, the CEO has to be involved. Yeah, CEO has to be in the room. So typically I've got CEO and the heads of marketing, product, sales, customer success, and then we backfill with whoever else until we get about a dozen people. Now, if we're all working on it together, then that means we're all in agreement and alignment on it. A lot of weak positioning comes from sales thinks about it this way, marketing thinks about it this way, the CEO thinks about it slightly different way. Big deal that we get by bringing everybody together is we all get our opinions out on the table, and we're going to get everybody into alignment. So I think that's big value. And then if everybody's in alignment, then everyone takes it back to their team and we're all singing the same song. In my experience, like back when I was a VP marketing, which I did for 25 years across 7 companies, back when I was a VP marketing and we were doing this stuff, my team would be the stewards of positioning once we got it done. So we would have a messaging and positioning document where we wrote all this stuff down, and that was basically going to be the positioning until we needed to change it. And there were a handful of things that would precipitate a change. So one, sometimes we brought out a new release and that was all new functionality. So that enabled new value. So we need to adjust the positioning for that. Sometimes we had something that was differentiated and then a competitor caught up with us and it's no longer differentiated. We're going to have to adjust for that. Sometimes there's a big acquisition in the space or new company jumps into this space, or something terrible like COVID happens, throws all the cards up in the air, and we need to call the emergency meeting of the cross-functional team to go back and look at the positioning again. If nothing was going on, I would have a standing meeting every 6 months. And every 6 months we get the gang together and we'd be like, competitors, has anything changed? Differentiated capabilities, has anything really changed? Anybody caught up with us? Anybody different? Is our value still the same? So if the value is still the same, we don't touch it. See you in 6 months. But if one of those things has changed and changed enough significantly, then maybe we need to go back and look at the positioning again and do it now before it's an emergency.
Perfect. Thank you. We got one more question, and then we'll have your closing thoughts, April. This has been getting some great feedback as well. All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. So, a small company, we don't, really have time for this, and there's all this other pressure. Why don't I just go to Chat GPT and use AI to position my company?
Because Chat GPT doesn't know what your differentiated value is. Only you know that. Only you know that. And so there's a lot of things that go into this that depend on your understanding of how customers make choices. And customers often make choices in a way that is not rational and is unpredictable. So in a new company that hasn't launched yet, generally we'll start out with something that I would call a positioning thesis, which is we built the company around this idea that these were our competitors. This is what our differentiated capabilities were. Therefore, this is what our value is that no one else can deliver. And these are the kind of customers that are going to love us. And this is the market that's going to win. But I've done that in-house 16 times, and not once were we right. Sometimes we were really wrong. Sometimes we're just a little bit wrong. But we launched the thing, and then it turns out customers are comparing us to something we never expected them to compare us to, because on the surface, it doesn't look like that. Or customers had value that was different than we thought it was going to be. Or there was something in the whole customer's ecosystem that actually made them think about this in a different way. Chat GPT can do a lot of interesting things, but I don't think Chat GPT is a replacement for deeply understanding, how your customers make purchase decisions, what's important to them and what isn't. Even asking Chat GPT who your competitors are is kind of the equivalent of doing a Google search. Like who the competitors you actually see in deals are often quite different than the competitors that you think you should see in deals.
Yeah, and I'll translate that. So for those of you who looked at April's first set of slides, that first box is that Chat GPT is not a substitute for April. So April, before I
not
turn
a substitute for a lot of things, man. But at this point, but even something as simple as asking, "Who's my competition?" the answer you get is likely to be incorrect.
Yeah, great point. So before we turn it over to Pam, April, when we chatted, so people are going to leave this call. So 5 minutes after the call ends, whether there's a head of marketing or a head of sales on this call, what should they be doing?
So if I was the head of marketing or the head of sales, and this is literally what I used to do when I got hired as the VP marketing, is I would go around to the CEO and the head of sales and the head of product, and I'd be like, who do we compete with? And how are we different? What's the value we can deliver that no one else can? And who are we going after? What's a best fit customer look like? And if I'm getting different answers from those three people, then we got a problem.
Sage advice.
Yeah.
April.
And so if I am getting different answers, I might plant the seed to say, look, I'm not saying the positioning is bad here, but it might be worthwhile to get a cross-functional team together and run through a little exercise, and let's just see where we get.
That's perfect. April, thank you. We're going to turn it back over to Pam because we have a couple sessions that are going to build upon what you've spoken about. So, April, on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much. And so, Pam, I'm going to hand it over to you for close.
Great. Thanks, Rob. And let me just add my thanks to April. Really great session. I love your examples. I love your energy. Super engaging. I love somebody who's funny. So thank you for that. I definitely have some things I'm going to put into practice right away. So this is a hallmark of a Sammy session, interactive, irreverent, and, hopefully from some of the comments, looks like everybody got a lot out of today's session. Just some logistical things. The recording will be available soon in the Meetup group, either later this week or early next. If you've registered for this session, you will get that link in case you want to watch it again. And as Rob said, we've got 2 more great Sammy sessions coming up this spring before we break for our traditional summer break. And on May 16th, Georgiana Laudy, Gia, who knows you, April, and said she was a great follow-on to your session. I guess the 2 of you sometimes tag team the different
She's
clients.
awesome. You guys should show up to this.
Yeah, exactly. Another Torontoan, I think. And has a session, how to get more customers without more marketing, which I think is another intriguing one as a marketing professional, but I will be tuning in certainly for that. Her company is called Forget the Funnel, which I also love too. So May 16th, that is announced and available and open for registrations. And then on June 20th, we're going to have Sherwin Uretsky and our own John Stone from the EC, who you met. Now, they have a really interesting session planned for us, Revenue Architecture Alignment, a blueprint for effective marketing and sales. So John has spent a lot of years in this area and has really built out something he's going to share with us. So that's on June 20th. That's open for registration, but I will officially announce that, so you'll get an alert later today. Now, also for those of us in the Boston area, and I know a lot of the folks on the phone today are from the Boston area, there is a live joint meetup with the Any Excuse gang. There's a lot of cross-pollination with Any Excuse CMO and Sammy, and that is on May 9th at the Waltham Weston. So we'll have a little placeholder announcement on the meetup group just so you can get alerted and you can sign up for that. But it's BYOB, just come as you are in the lobby of the Waltham Weston at 6 p.m. on May 9th, but you will get alerted about that as well. And as always, the meetup group has all the details of all of the sessions. So please make sure your settings in Meetup show that you'll get all of our alerts. And we've got some good stuff cooking for the fall as well. Yes. As always, if there's topics or speakers that you want to hear from, please let one of us know so that we can reach out to that person. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. Think about your positioning. April gave us some great stuff to work on, and we'll see you all on May 16th.
All right.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, April.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.